A Small and Tall Collection. Chapter 8. What to Do. Ray was never really a light sleeper. The recent sickness had thrown his whole schedule off. Every little sound woke up something in his brain, especially in the dead of night. His bedsheets felt weird, like they were too loose and trying to tie him up while he slept, and his pajamas made his skin crawl. Food didn't quite have the same taste, which Soren said was because of his sinus stuff. Also, more annoyingly, he'd been waking up in the middle of the night for a drink of water or to go to the bathroom. Ray wasn't the only one. Dorian had also been getting up too, but he didn't like admitting it for whatever reason. Maybe he was just trying to seem tougher. Ray didn't really care one way or the other. What did concern him was what was on his bedside table, right here, right now. The only reason he'd rolled over was because he was feeling a bit overheated, followed soon after by the sound of someone throwing up. He had called out to his brother, but when he received no answer, Ray's concern increased.
Dorian? Are you getting what the...
Ray had cracked open his eyes to check on his brother, when, quite distinctly, he saw something on his bedside table doubled over and making sounds. The hair on his arms started standing on end, and he knew something was different about what he was seeing. He wasn't sure what, but some curious part of him drew him in, and instantly he was awake. He pushed himself up and reached over toward the light, watching eagerly as the figure stumbled and fumbled their way off to the side by the tissue box, tap it a few times, and then vanish between the box and the light. He couldn't wait for another moment. The young boy wasn't unfamiliar with this level of excitement. Every invention that didn't immediately fall apart made him absolutely giddy and curious about what he could do next. It was the same kind of excitement he was feeling now.
Oh, Ray, what's your problem? Turn off the light,
mumbled Dorian. It was obvious he was still fast asleep and annoyed with him, but Ray didn't care. He needed his brother's help and needed to know what was on their bedside table.
Dorian, something's on the table. I just saw it. It's behind the tissue box.
Ray hissed. Once again, he saw the shadow move. They needed to act quickly if they were going to see what this thing was.
You're probably just dreaming,
his brother grumbled.
No, I wasn't. I thought you were getting sick, and I saw something dart around the lamp by the tissue box. Come on, help me look real quick,
said Ray. The youngest managed to catch his brother's eyes, and in that moment, Dorian seemed to see that Ray was serious and not just messing around. He rolled his eyes and mumbled some kind of agreement, but Ray didn't really care. He was already pushing himself up and out from under the covers and preparing to reach for the lamp. He reached over and flicked the light on. Ray wasn't sure what he saw, but what he did know was that something was leaving a shadow right behind the lamp. As he slid out from under the covers, Ray never tore his eyes away from the spot where he saw the shadow. And then he saw it. Her. At least, he thought it was a her, based on her facial features. She was small and pale, and she looked absolutely exhausted. It was absolutely fascinating, seeing something that looked so human, and yet be so small. Ray gazed into her blue-gray eyes for what felt like an hour before she coughed and retched, getting sick all over the bedside table. Ray could also see evidence that she got sick by his old medicine cup too, but he decided to worry about that later.
Whoa, did you hear that?
Asked Dorian. Ray subconsciously nodded as he slowly inched his way forward and to the side to look at the small figure again.
Dorian, you've got to see this,
breathed Ray. Ray had moved cautiously, as if one of his experiments would topple at the slightest tremor of the ground. The last thing he wanted to do was startle the figure. Dorian, on the other hand, hadn't seen or noticed the anomalies and flopped out of his bed as if he was going to be late for pancakes.
Whoa!
Dorian spotted her too, and immediately he understood why Ray was acting the way he was. From where he was standing beside his bed, he could see better over the tissue box and spotted the small figure that was too small, too real, to just be a toy or some weird invention of Ray's. Without words, both boys advanced at a snail's pace in hopes to keep the thing on the table. Dorian watched as it fell to its knees, absent-mindedly tapping at its sides as if it were searching for something that wasn't there. It looked scared, if that was possible for something so small to have facial expressions like that. He and Ray exchanged a quick glance before Ray reached out and grabbed the lamp while Dorian pulled the tissue box aside, revealing the small figure immediately behind. Fascination flooded the boys' minds as they watched the figure. She was wearing what looked like clothes, layers of them. Some kind of light tan shirt and brown pants with what looked like a green cloak or poncho over her shoulders. There was something that looked like a light bulb on one side of her hip, and a bag slung over the other shoulder. Features gaunt and hollow, she didn't look like she was doing or feeling well in the slightest. How she looked reminded Ray of how he and his brother looked for the past few days. Sick.
Ray? That's not one of yours, is it?
Asked Dorian, barely whispering.
No way.
Ray muttered, watching how the blue-gray eyes flicked back and forth between him and his brother.
Then what is it?
Dorian hissed back.
I don't know, but I think it's a she. And I don't think she's feeling well.
Ray muttered back. He cleared the tension in his throat with a few light coughs as he directed his words at the small figure.
Hey, are you okay? You think it or she can understand us?
Dorian asked.
I don't know,
Ray stated.
But she's looking from me to you, so she can at least hear us.
Ray watched as the figure's shoulders began to shake, vibrating as her chest heaved rapidly in and out. She was obviously hyperventilating. Ray, if he held his breath, could almost hear her small gasps.
This isn't a dream, right? I mean, she's real.
Dorian's hand was already in motion before Ray registered his question. Everything moved so fast. Ashlyn, who was listening to the boys talk back and forth about whether or not she could understand or if she was real, was starting to feel lightheaded again. The corners of her vision were blurring. She wanted to vomit again, but nothing was left to give. Every sense she possessed was deteriorating rapidly, and now she was backed into a corner. She was trying to recite the borrower rules in her head when a massive amount of movement caught her attention. Her eyes snapped up to see the older of the two, Dorian, reaching his hand out toward her. Fingers were extended, palm easily eclipsing her body. Ashlyn felt her instincts take over her aching body as she forced herself to her feet and threw herself backward away from the child's grasp. Sadly, she overestimated the force she would need. She jumped up and back so violently that her back actually hit the wall beside the bedside table. She managed to get away, yes, but there was something she didn't account for. The gap. Between the bedside table and the wall, there was a gap about an inch wide, which was just enough for her to slip through. For a brief moment, Ashlyn's body was perfectly posed against the wall and the table before her center of gravity shifted again, and she began to plummet into the shadows. A scream was lodged somewhere in Ashlyn's throat as she began to slip, but it didn't stay there for long. As her body fell, an immense shadow fell over her, and a pressure surrounded her right arm. She heard a distinct popping sound from her shoulder, as if she were cracking her knuckles, but on a much larger, louder scale, and the scream that was trapped erupted out of her. Her body hung limp momentarily before her body began lifting from her throbbing arm. She didn't want to look, but impulse overrode her, and she glanced up only to see her arm was being pinched between the fingers of the one called Dorian. He was lifting her by her throbbing arm, and there was nothing she could do. Those immense fleshy columns and their vice-like grip around her aching appendage would not release her, no matter how she struggled, not that she had the strength to. The borrower swallowed the cries of pain she wanted to release and replaced them with choking whimpers and groans. She closed her eyes tight and averted her gaze from her arm. She wasn't sure if she was about to have it ripped from her body, or if it was about to be broken into tiny pieces. Whatever the case, she didn't want to see it. She didn't want to look at the human child's face as he examined her now fully exposed body. There would be no escape now. The words of the youngest boy sounded muffled and distant, but Ashlyn was still able to make them out in some form.
Dorian, what are you doing? You'll hurt her.
Ray's harsh whisper was followed by a scuffling. Ray had watched as the little figure had backed up and had started to fall from the bedside table to the floor. Dorian was faster and had managed to grab her arm, but the scream that followed told Ray that Dorian had either grabbed too hard or that she didn't like being touched. Whatever the case, Dorian had managed to keep her from falling at the cost of injuring her, so he was grateful for that much at least. Ray saw how the figure looked away from where her arm was being grabbed and felt his heart ache for her. She was terrified beyond words, and he and Dorian were causing it.
Dorian, you're hurting her. Don't pinch her arm like that.
Ray urged. Dorian grunted frustratingly and held out the partially limp figure.
Well, then you hold her.
Dorian hissed back. Ray didn't have time to object as Dorian lowered the tiny woman into his hands. Ray cupped his hands and prayed she didn't do anything rash like try to run or jump out of his hands. Thankfully, she didn't seem to be able to do either as she crumpled into a ball in his hands and pulled her arm towards her torso. The sensation was a novel one. The life was so small, but so much like his own. Ray had held his friends as pets before, like hamsters and guinea pigs. He'd even pet a few fish before. This was something entirely different. In the dim lamplight, he was able to see more of her features now that she was so much closer to him. He could make out her fingers, and the way her hair fell across her sweat-chilled cheek. He could see her fingernails and how they grasped at the fabric of her clothes. It hit Ray all at once that she wasn't just some creature. She was a living being, practically human, except for her size. Ray glanced up at his brother just in time to see him dumping out the contents of a drawer from their bedside table the pieces and parts scattering while others stacked and lumped together. That's what they got for shoving their random knickknacks into the thing in the first place. Rey also saw Dorian was getting together what looked like a set of bundled socks, some of the crackers, and a lid of water.
Dorian, what are you doing?
Asked the kid.
What do you think? Setting up an area for her until we figure out what to do with her,
replied Dorian. Immediately, Ashlyn turned her fear-filled eyes onto Rey and then to his brother. She attempted to squirm, but weakness overtook her. Not even adrenaline could force her body to flee now. Rey noticed this and felt a pang in his heart. She seemed so scared, so helpless.
Dorian, I don't like the sound of that,
stated Rey.
Well, what else are we gonna do with her?
Dorian asked harshly.
I don't know. Let her go? I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't feel right keeping her in a drawer,
mumbled Rey. He noticed the eager gleam in the small woman's features as she looked up into his eyes for only a moment. It took everything the boy had to tear his gaze from the figure to his brother.
I don't know. I think we need to wake up Soren. Get his help. You saw Soren and how tired he was. We went to bed early and everything. He's tired. You're tired. I'm tired. She looks tired. It's just for the night,
repeated Dorian.
You want to wake up Soren when he's feeling sick and tired?
Rey chewed on his bottom lip in confliction before mumbling,
No. And, do you see her? She looks sick too. She might have been the one to get us sick for all we know. Remember what Soren said about keeping the mice in the walls as pets?
Pointed at Dorian.
Rude. You germy little twerps are the reason I'm sick,
Ashlyn thought as her heart raced faster and faster. That light-headed feeling consumed her again. I can't let them take me. I can't break the rules. But I can't let them keep me. I'm gonna be a pet. They're gonna get me in a cage. And I'm gonna be a pet. This is bad. This is really, really, really bad. I should have just stayed in the walls. Why did I think medicine was going to help? That's a human thing.
Yeah, but good. Then it's settled,
interrupted Dorian.
She'll be safe in here for the night, and then Soren will know what to do with her. Now, put her down in there. Let's get some sleep, and we'll get Soren in here first thing tomorrow. Besides, he can't do anything if he's just as sick and tired as the rest of us.
Rey looked down at the little figure again, the same pang hitting him again, before relenting to his brother's idea. He walked over to the bedside table carefully and lowered his hands into the hard wood box. Ashlyn seized the opportunity to get off of the child's hands as fast as possible, scrambling to get off and instantly regretting her quickness of movement as her body screamed in agony, especially her arm. Whatever that boy did to make her fingertips tingly and numb, already there were bruises forming on her arm in the shape of finger pads. She stumbled backward and pressed her spine against the hardwood directly behind her and stared up from the shadows at the faces of the two boys. Please don't close the door. Please don't close the door. I can maybe get out. If you don't close the door, please, just let me go. Ashlyn's silent thoughts went unanswered as the older boy reached out and pressed his hand against the edge. She wanted to cry out and beg them to stop, but instinct stopped her once again. as she was sealed in darkness, barely the width of her hand open at the top of the container. Ashlyn choked on a sob that rose up in her throat. Sliding down the back of her wooden prison, she curled in on herself. Her body shook like a leaf in a hurricane, but she had no tears or energy left to maintain her fear. She listened as the two boys talked for a little while longer, in hushed words, before the bedside light finally flicked out, leaving her in complete darkness.
No, it's over. It's all over. I'm caught. I've been seen, and now I'm caught. I don't even have my weapons to protect me. Their dad is going to put me in a cage, and I'll live off of pellets and goodness knows what else until the end of my days. Poking, rotting.
Ashlyn shivered as she thought about the boy's hands holding her. The warmth, the tiny flexes each finger or muscle made as he adjusted to her weight. It was a living nightmare. But what was worse was the thought that it would be all she ever knew from here on out. Exhaustion dragged her eyelids further and further down. It wasn't even a matter of sleep now. Between the pain and chills and sickness and the fate she knew she would have to endure, it took everything she had left in her to drag her way over to the bundled socks and laid down. For just a moment, she wanted to enjoy the simple comfort of her hip lamp, but even that was a disappointment as the lamp flickered on and off.
Even the battery is failing me. Truly, the last thing to go wrong.
Ashlyn recited the borrowable rules in her head, mainly the 3 that truly mattered.
Don't be seen. Don't get caught. Don't talk to the humans. Well, if this is how I end, I can at least follow the last rule. Then again, is it worth it? Maybe if I talk to those boys, then they'll let me go. The one seemed to think so. Am I kidding? Who am I trying to convince? Myself? I'm not making it out of here. This is my life now.
Ashlyn felt a single tear drip down her cheek as, finally, the last life of her hip lamp battery drained. Lying there in complete darkness, Ashlyn curled into the top of the stiff sock and let her exhaustion overtake her.